So I review a lot of plugins here on this channel, but many of you have asked me what plugins am I actually using in my productions. So I gave it some thought and decided I wanted to do a video about the guitar plugin chains I'm using. And to make it interesting, I've actually spread it over 3 different videos. In this video, we're going to take a look at the main rhythm part of a recent production, and I'm going to show you the guitar plugin chains that I'm using. And just to level the playing field, I'm going to replicate those tones, which were all created with third-party plugins, and see what I can do with stock plugins to see how close I can get. So if you're just getting started and don't have a big plugin budget, how close can we come using stock plugins? Parts 2 and 3 cover a guitar submaster and a guitar solo. I'm going to give you more details about those towards the end of this video, so stick around for that. But for this video, we're going to take a look at the main guitar rhythm part, and that sounds something like this. All right, let's get into this. So the focus of this video are the plugin chains and the plugins that I'm using in my guitar chains. I'm not going to go to tutorial mode on you. I'm not doing reviews. So if you're looking for those bypassed unity gain examples, you're not going to get that in this video. I just want to enlighten you to the plugins that I am currently using in my projects. Important to note, this is not a sponsored video. All of the plugins in this project are plugins that I'm actively using in my different tracks, whether it came to me as a review plugin at one point or I purchased it. These are plugins that I'm actually currently using in my different mixes, and wanted to share those with you. So to start, the guitar tracks in this project were all recorded with a Hughes & Kettner Grandmeister Deluxe 40. I did a whole video on that. That amp has a built-in DI, allows you to record with the built-in cab sim, or you can bypass that and use a cab sim in your mix. I demonstrate that whole process in that video, so I'm going to put a link in the description. So if you have any questions or if you're curious about the recording process of this amplifier, make sure to check out that video. But the guitars in this track in this session were all recorded from a tube amp, but direct. There's no cabs involved. So whether you're recording that way, whether you're using plugins, or maybe you're recording with an amp and a microphone, all the basic principles will apply, but obviously the specifics to what you're doing will need to be tailored to your tracks. But I'll enlighten you here on the plugins that I am using and why I am using them. All right, so let's start off with the rhythm track here. I'll give you a little sample of what it sounds like. All right, nice and fat and heavy. That's actually 2 guitars working together to create that tone. I'm using my Howard Roberts Fusion guitar. The one on the left side, I'm using the humbucker in the bridge position, and then the one on the right side, I'm using a humbucker in the neck position. And then I've set up the chains, which are virtually identical. There's one exception. On the left, we're using this impulse loader from Audio Assault. Again, I talk about this in that video I mentioned before. This track was recorded without a cab IR, so it's just the straight amp, so I needed to load an IR to complete that tone here. I talk about that more in that video, so I won't go too much into it here. But other than that, the plugin chains between the ones left and right are identical, but important to note that I've customized the EQs for each particular instrument. I'm not going to go too deep into both of them, but just so you know, if you are doing that and recording 2 guitars, and if you're doubling those parts and the tones of those 2 guitars are different, treat them differently. Don't try to treat them the same. It's a shortcut, and it's not going to get you the most desirable results. So let's dive into the actual chain that I'm using. So right off the top is a FabFilter Pro Q3. And it's interesting because one of the early questions that I had that a lot of people I know have when they're just getting started in mixing is, where do you place an EQ in the chain? Is it before a compressor? Is it after a compressor? Well, the answer is it can be all over the place, because if you look at my chain here, I've got a Pro Q3, and as we get into this, I've got a channel strip which has an EQ, and then I have another instance of Pro Q3 at the end. So I'm actually using 3 different EQs. And why am I using 3 EQs? Well, let me explain. So the first one is designed to get at any of those harsh frequencies that you just want to get rid of. If there's like a scratchy pick noise, or if there's some interference or some hum from the amp or something that you just want to get rid of. My argument is, why put it through the chain and process it multiple times only to try and pull it out at the end. It's good to go in right at the beginning and just get rid of it. I love the Pro Q3 because you can actually solo frequencies. So if you're sweeping through it and you're trying to find that noise, it's a great way to identify where those problem areas are. Waves has the F6. It does the same thing where you can actually isolate particular frequencies. If your plugin doesn't do that, it's okay. What I would do is sort of jack it up really high and sort of sweep through it and figure out where those really noisy frequencies are and just cut it. Just get it out of there. Don't go crazy EQing at this stage. We're just looking to remove the most offending frequencies, 1, 2 tops. Just get it out of there. This way we're not just building on it and then trying to remove it later. So Pro Q3 is the first plugin in my chain. As I said, I've got a cab loader here. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I do cover that in the other video, but it just happens to be on this particular track. And oh, by the way, something really important to note is my plugin chains for guitars. I kind of look at it as 2 half chains. I'm looking to establish the tone that I'm trying to create, and that's sort of established with the first couple of plugins, and then the second half of the plugins are designed to shape the tone and get it to fit and work with the mix. Those are 2 completely different things. You know, imagine you're in the room and you've got your Marshall here and you're twisting dials on the Marshall, and that's just something you're going to do before you record so you get something you really like, and then maybe you'll do a little processing or a little EQing on the way in. Maybe you're going through some hardware or not, but that first half a stack of plugins, for me, I use it to shape the tone of the guitar, and I can do it in solo just to get it sounding right to my ear. So like I said, the second one here is the BX Console N Brainworks. This is a Neve emulation. It's a really cool plugin. I like it just to give it a bit of mojo, sort of that Neve mojo. Got some great EQ built in. There is a dynamic section, things like that. I don't spend too much time here. I'm just looking again to get the levels. Gain staging is important from plugin to plugin, just making sure my levels are consistent all the way through from plugin to plugin. Shaping the tone a little bit here. In fact, I'll play you what this sounds like. I'll solo this track and I'll turn off the post processing. So we've just got the first couple plugins on, and it sounds like this. So that's the tone that I've created, that I've recorded, basically. Obviously, I'm dealing with it here in the DAW, but that's sort of the first half in establishing that tone. So I have 2 more plugins in this particular chain. The next one is the VCL4 from Fuse Audio Labs. This is, I guess, like an LA4 emulation. Fuse is just well known for their hardware emulations, just really great analog sounding plugins. I really, really love them. I don't often use a lot of compression or limiting on heavy guitars. It's just not something I typically do, but I just find with a lot of Fuse stuff is that it just brings you that warmth and roundness. And if I play it, I'll turn it on. If you look at sort of how much gain reduction I'm giving it, it's not much at all. Really 1 or 2 dB in gain reduction, and just sort of kissing that compressor just creates a little bit of roundness and warmth to the track. I really like the effect I got from that. It was sort of almost an afterthought as I was in the final polish, and I decided to give it a try and really like it. So that's the next one. That's the VCL4 from Fuse Audio Labs. And then the last one is our good friend, the Pro Q3, once again. As I said, I've got 3 EQs in this chain. Each one is doing its own thing. The first one is sort of cutting frequencies that I just don't want. The second one, which is built into the channel strip, is helping me shape the initial tone of the guitar. And then the last one here is designed to get that guitar to fit into the mix. I'm always rolling off everything below 90 hertz when I get it out of the way, the bass guitar and the drums. So that's the first move you'll see there. The other 2, I've got some frequencies that I'm cutting. One great thing about Pro Q3 is that it can look at other instances of Pro Q3 and let you know if there's any frequencies ganging up with different tracks, so you can compare it to other guitars or bass guitar or keyboards, whatever you're doing, to see where there's a lot of ganging up going in. So a lot of these cuts just came from just shaping the tone, but also getting it out of the way of other instruments. And then a little boost in the top end, just give it a little bit of shine, and there you go. And just to compare, as I said, I've got the same plugin chain for the guitar on the right, but the moves are different. And I'm not going to compare all of them, but if you just look at the EQ, you'll notice that the curves are radically different. I'm rolling off the bottom end to both, but on the right guitar, I'm actually shaving off the top end. It's kind of a darker sounding guitar. I didn't want it to be as bright as the one on the left, again, just to make it sound a little different. And then the peaks and valleys here are all custom to that guitar. I'm not copying it from the left one. It's really important. Don't take shortcuts there. You want to get those guitars out of the way of each other so they work well together, right? So that is the very, very, very critical thing. So you can listen to the 2 guitars together. On the left. slightly different, and then together. And I'll give it to you in context. And by the way, one last thing I do want to mention is that using the bus is I actually bus both tracks to a reverb. Instead of putting different reverbs on different tracks, I generally create a guitar effects bus. So I can use one reverb for both. In this case, I'm also using the Brainworks Rooms. This is a really cool reverb, very flexible. But this way it's the same reverb, and then you just dial in the amount that you want. So if there's any reflections or things like that, they're consistent. I don't want to drown, especially a guitar like that. I don't want it too wet. It just sort of gets really wishy-washy. So I'm just using the BX Rooms, and both of those tracks are bused to the same. I do EQ my bus a little bit. I don't get too much into that here, but here's another Pro Q3 where I'm just EQing the bus as well, so EQing the reverb as well. That's a deeper dive into mixing techniques, but just wanted to mention that the Pro Q3 is making an appearance here. All right, so now let's see if I can replicate the tones using stock plugins. I've actually taken the liberty of working through it already. To say it's easy to match, it's not necessarily easy, but the idea is if we can get workable tones. And I will say, lesson learned, call this a spoiler, but I spent a lot on plugins thinking it was going to help my mixes, where looking back, I really should have spent time with all of the plugins that were built into the DAW. I mean, I'm using Logic here, and it is loaded with plugins. Certainly there are specialty plugins that do come into play and are developed that are maybe different than what you'd find in a standard DAW, but all of the basics are there and then some. So to start, I use the channel EQ built into Logic. So what I did is I went in and I matched the curves as close as I could, and then did a little tweak. But you can see I'm just doing that same cut at the head of the chain just to get those frequencies that I wanted to get out. From there, I'm using two plugins that are kind of working together because I had a channel strip that had a lot of different features. I didn't quite have a plugin to match. There is the console, vintage console EQ built into Logic, but I use that in conjunction with the linear phase EQ. The thing I liked about this console EQ, it does give you some drive and some of that sort of saturation, similar to what you would find in a channel strip plugin. So I use these two to work together really to take the role of this one plugin here, the BX console N. So these two are working together. I looked at the EQ curves and settings and I tried to match them a little bit, but then once they were done, I went and I tweaked them a little bit. So these two are taking the place of the BX console N. That's the vintage console EQ and the linear phase EQ. Next in the chain was the compression. I had the VCL4. This one was a little tricky. I mean, the Logic has a whole series of compressors, so I used a vintage VCA just to sort of emulate this plugin. I mean, there's a certain quality with this particular plugin, so but I matched the ratio, the threshold as close as I could together just to make it sound similar, and I just wanted a slight little kiss of the compressor to see if it would create a little something for the track. And then at the end, the final EQ, I used another instance of the linear phase EQ, matched it up with the Pro Q3. If you notice, the curves are quite similar. I made some minor tweaks, just they are different EQs, but tried to keep the Qs the same and everything like that. So let's see how close these two tracks sound to each other. So, you know what, not exactly the same, but definitely in the ballpark. And it goes to show that if you know what you're doing with plugins, you take the time and learn them. I mean, ultimately, the basic function of a plugin is what it is. I think the differences you'll find with third-party plugins, some of them like to emulate existing hardware and things like that. But if you're using Logic or something similar, Pro Tools, they all come with their own plugins. If you're just getting started, I think this shows that you can really spend times with the plugins that you have. And I think it'll help you learn what they do. That's something that I didn't do. I wasted a lot of time buying plugins, and now I just don't use them. I have a toolbox of 10 to 15 plugins probably that I'm using on a regular basis. But honestly, the results, are they that drastic? Yeah, there's some slight characteristic differences, but certainly if that's what I ended up coming up with, I certainly wouldn't have been disappointed about that. So if you're mixing at home and you're limited to the plugins that came with your DAW, you've got a lot to work with. Don't be worried about that. Well, there you have my guitar plugin chains for my main rhythm guitar. As I mentioned, there's 2 more parts to this series. In the second part, I'm going to take a look at a guitar submaster. As you saw in this video, the main guitar part is actually 2 parts that ultimately are supposed to sound like one instrument. So I bust those to a submaster, and that went through a little bit of processing. So I'm going to put a link in the description so you can check video number 2 out to see what plugin chain that I'm using for the guitar submaster. And the third video is actually going to explore one of the guitar solos in the song, where much like this video, I use third-party plugins, and then I tried to replicate those tones again using stock plugins. So it'll be interesting to see how the results fared there as well. The links to both of those are in the description, so make sure to check them out. Well, if you're new to this channel, I hope I've earned a subscribe. I got a lot of videos on this channel, many revolving around this home studio, geared to hopefully help making your home studio life better. So just click that subscribe button and come along for the ride. If you really want to support this channel, I am on Patreon. Links to everything I've discussed and some things I haven't are in the description below. And above all else, I hope I'll see you again in another video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And please like, subscribe, and ring that bell to stay up to date. Remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. There are a lot of great musical projects you can do by yourself, right from your own home. I hope to see you again next time.